Today I have a real special thing to share with you. You know, my job gives me the opportunity to meet with special people, which is why I think my job is the best job in this world. And I've had such an opportunity yesterday to meet with Yasmin Suka. She's from South Africa. She was working with Desmond Tutu on the Truth and Reconciliation, and now she is the executive director of human rights in South Africa, and she's doing some other very special things. And before I keep speaking, I want to let you know I'm Mubina Jaffer, Senator from British Columbia, and I would like to introduce you to Yasmin Suka. And Yasmin, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background.
I'm a human rights lawyer. I grew up in apartheid South Africa and was an activist during that time, working with the interfaith movement and the human rights lawyers. In 1996, I was appointed by President Mandela to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, where I served until 2001. I was then appointed by the Office of the High Commissioner to be a commissioner in Sierra Leone on their Truth Commission. And in 2010, I was appointed by the Secretary General to a panel of experts to investigate war crimes in Sri Lanka.
You've done so much, and you know, for us here in Canada, we don't often get to hear from somebody who was in the original Truth and Reconciliation. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of things you did and what the experience was like?
I chaired the Human Rights Violations Committee, and what we were doing was documenting the testimony of victims. We also had to investigate the violations and in fact compile a truth for the country. Our committee was the engine room of the commission, so we were also responsible for public hearings. And I must say, even though I knew, or rather I thought I knew, what had happened in South Africa, I was quite shocked by the organization of the way in which the apartheid state worked. And I was really surprised. It didn't matter whether you went to an urban city or a rural area, the violations were the same. And that really pointed to the systematic nature of the way in which the apartheid system worked. I was very humbled because what you were dealing with effectively was the story of survivors. And people demonstrated their huge courage, their fortitude. And of course, we never believed that freedom would come in our lifetime. Last weekend, we celebrated 20 years of freedom. Yesterday, my country went to its 5th peaceful election. And I have to say that that's a real privilege. It's not often that you see freedom in your lifetime.
You know, I didn't mean to share this story with you, but when you said that you didn't think it would happen in your lifetime, I was a university student in London when I organized a boycott against Barclays Bank, and the manager used to say to me, "Young lady, just go and keep your head in the books. Not in anybody's lifetime we're going to see the end of apartheid." And when Nelson Mandela walked down the street out of jail, it was like change can happen. Human rights do in the end succeed. And that's why I want to talk to you about, you went to Sierra Leone. I went to see the courts in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
And that Truth and Reconciliation process was very different from South Africa's, even though it was geared towards, sadly, the world didn't come through to provide the resources for the Sierra Leone Truth and Reconciliation process. What was that like for you?
It was different. I have to say that when I came out of the South African process, I was a little angry and quite distraught because I thought that we could have done more. And in a sense, what was happening in the commission was a microcosm of the battles which were being fought outside. Our commission was modeled in South Africa very much on the Latin American experiences. And so it really focused on what I call civil and political rights violations. And in my view, what we really needed to do was focus on the policies of apartheid, the political economy, and really the socio-economic rights and cultural rights violations. Of course, at that time in the world, because of the Western influence over the world, it is only now that we appreciate the importance of socio-economic rights. But what was interesting was being able to go to Sierra Leone and in fact deal with the issues which we didn't grapple with in South Africa. So for one, the question of child soldiers and the forcible recruitment of children. The other was the violations against women. When we began the commission in Sierra Leone, the most well-known violation was that of amputations. No one actually believed that sexual violence was so high on the list. And I think what is groundbreaking about the Sierra Leone Truth Commission, even though it was poorly resourced, was that it was really able to paint a picture of what had happened to women, and also the link between the low status that women enjoy at all levels, the legal level, the political and social and economic, and how in a time of conflict, when all the barriers break down, that is when women become an increasing target. And of course, when we asked women in Sierra Leone, what would you like to see in terms of reparation? The interesting thing most of them said is legal reform. We want to ensure that girls as young as 8 can't be married off to older people. We want to raise the level of children's marriageable age. The second was they said that all girls should be able to go to tertiary school, and we then negotiated that under the HIPIC program. The third was, of course, that women should have access to more than microcredit, because it's fashionable to say, okay, microloans for women, and many of the women argued that they were market traders already. They wanted access to proper bank loans, and they all agreed that in terms of reparation, the priority should be children first, and then women who had suffered sexual violence. Now, of course, even though Sierra Leone has huge mineral wealth resources, the problem is that it was not yet benefiting the country. And so it has taken, I think, almost 10 years to actually get government to begin to implement the recommendations. But I think the report was groundbreaking in the sense that it created a map for the government to actually move to a particular terrain in which not only human rights would be appreciated, but it will also move closer to giving women some form of equality in the country.
You saying all this, it's just it's blowing my mind now, because I was in Sierra Leone when you were having the truth and reconciliation process, and I did not think that you had been able to achieve as much as you're saying, so that's amazing. Did speak to some of the women and the challenges they had, and from how you're describing it now, how much you've done with what little you had, you all were very special people, and especially you, and I know you won't accept that, but having gone through truth and reconciliation, and then the Sierra Leone process, and then you're with your own South African country's human rights, but having met you yesterday and hearing from you that you have worked on issues of Sri Lanka, and that we have a very large community in Canada from Sri Lanka, and for many, many years I was a refugee lawyer that worked with Sri Lankans from Sinhala, Tamil, Burgher, Muslim, and knowing the challenges that have existed in Sri Lanka, it was a real honor to hear from you yesterday. Can you share with us what the report is called, what the process was, and what the findings? And then at the end of this broadcast, I will put up the report that it's on the internet, that you can access and read for yourself, and then give us feedback. Can you tell us what the process has been like?
Well, in 2010, I was part of the panel of experts that advised the Secretary General on war crimes in Sri Lanka. I think why that investigation or inquiry was important was because it pointed to the fact that here you had a government dealing with what I call quite an awful enemy, because the LTTE was a brutal organization. At some point they were proscribed as terrorists, but at the end of the day they also represented, for the Tamil community, a liberation movement. And the final phase of this battle was fought out on a very narrow strip of beach land. And what's unique about this war is that, in a sense, it's the way it ended and how brutally it was done. In September 2008, the government of Sri Lanka asked all of the international agencies, including the United Nations, to leave the final battle zone. And they went, but a number of internationals and national employees refused to go. And they, of course, were the ones who bore witness to the carnage that took place. The government of Sri Lanka manipulated the figures. So, they told the world that only 75,000 people were still in the battle zone. And in reality, there were more than 300,000 at the time. So the food supplies that were going in for 75,000 people. In addition, they refused to allow medical supplies for operations and anesthetics to go in. So you can imagine how that hampered the doctors. They also declared what they call 3 safe fire zones. And what this meant is that civilians were meant to congregate in there and be safe from the shelling and bombing. But each time they did, then they would fire and shell that area, really leading to a large loss of civilian life. They also bombed the hospitals, and there were many makeshift hospitals. And so what we found was this really awful image of civilians carrying everything they have and moving as the battle line is coming closer, trapped really between a depleted army in the form of the LTTE, and on the other hand, the Sri Lankan army slowly drawing closer until the final battlefield is on this thin strip of land next to the beachfront. The LTTE were defeated by the Sri Lankan military, and people came out in May 2009 when the government of Sri Lanka officially declared a victory. Shockingly for the world, 290,000 people emerged, and there were real questions about how many people actually died in this war. By our conservative calculation, we think around 40,000 civilians were killed. Now, this is the first war in this decade where you have such large numbers of people, and we indicate that the Sri Lankan military have a case here to answer. We also had to deal with allegations that the political leadership of the LTTE had decided to surrender, and in fact they were told to come out under a white flag. Now, there are allegations, which I think are fairly credible, that they came out under the white flag and in fact were executed. There are also allegations about a number of women, including the famous TV presenter Itjp, where pictures of a naked body which showed some sexual violations were brought into the public arena. We were not able to confirm that they were true because it was almost at the end of our mandate, but we noted that for a future inquiry. Now, we handed over our report in March 2011.
And what was your report called?
It's called the Report of the Panel of Experts on War Crimes in Sri Lanka. It is freely available on the net, and you can certainly find it on the UN website. But in the intervening years between 2011 and 2013, there were a number of allegations of sexual violence, and a colleague of mine, Frances Harrison, was commissioned by the BBC to produce a documentary on sexual violence. I think she thought initially that this would deal with sexual violence in the immediate aftermath of the conflict, and she was quite shocked, I think, to find that in fact this was dealing with violations long after the conflict was supposed to be ended. So she approached me and asked me if I was willing to conduct some research. And I was very clear that while I had a number of people that I could rely on to do the investigations, I wanted this to go beyond the anecdotal and to do it in a way which would be legally unassailable. And so I approached the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales, and was very happy to partner with them on this study. They gave me a number of barristers. Our core group of witnesses, which we got from a number of lawyers and doctors, they were mainly based in the United Kingdom, 40 of them. We didn't plan that it should be 20 men and 20 women, but that's how it actually turned out. The interviews were conducted by the lawyers, all of them highly qualified barristers. My lead investigator was in fact a QC of many years of standing, who has worked on the Balkan tribunals as well as with me previously on the Sri Lankan work. And they really made every effort to ensure that this was done in a way which would be it would stand the test of legal scrutiny. The witness statements were supported by independent medical legal reports, all of the medical practitioners doing this under the Istanbul Protocol, which is the usual protocol you use for torture and sexual violence. In addition to that, the practitioners gave us 2 expert opinions, and I was then given access by another colleague to a further 57 medical legal reports. So in effect, I had 100 documents which confirmed that this was systematic, it was widespread. In terms of the analysis and the patterns we picked up, in our pool of 40, I think 32 of them had been white fanned. Now, white fanning is a common form of abduction using a white fan by the CID and TID of Sri Lanka. The rest of them were abducted by military vehicles, blindfolded and driven to secret detention centers. At the detention centers, they are interrogated. The interrogation is fairly brutal. They're photographed, they're fingerprinted, and they're forced to sign blank statements or statements in similar. And usually the question is about, you need to make a confession that you remember of the LTTE. And even if you're not, you're forced to do so. All of our witnesses report the most horrible torture. Torture included the usual things: beatings, beatings with stick, heated plastic pipes, beating on the soles of the feet, being hung from the ceiling, having chains attached to their nipples, their testicles, and really horrible things. All of the men and women report sexual violence, and not just a single episode, but multiple episodes of rape both vaginal and anal, both men and women, men being asked to perform fellatio as well. And I don't want to go into all of the graphic details, but suffice it to say that it was an incredibly brutal process for both the men and the women. A key factor that we picked up was the way in which bribery and extortion played a role. Our witnesses belonged to a lucky group. Their relatives went looking for them. They were able to pay a bribe to an intermediary. The bribe was usually a large sum of money, and that secured their release from these centers. They were then taken to safe houses in Colombo. Either they were taken by boat to India, and from India arrived in the UK, or actually they flew out directly from the airport. And that for me was, I think, a clear line that in fact this is planned at the highest level, and that it is done with the collaboration between the immigration officials, the police, and the military, and of course the paramilitary groups who are surrogates of the government. All of our group arrive in the UK. They apply for asylum. Some of them were granted asylum already. They have never spoken to anybody about what has happened to them. In the Tamil community in Sri Lanka, there's a deep shame about rape. And so people don't disclose that even to family members. Half of our group confirmed that they tried to kill themselves on arriving in the UK, and many of them remain suicidal according to the evidence of the medical doctors. Many of them report that on learning that they had escaped the country, their family members were visited and experienced reprisals at the hands of the security forces. So our report is called An Unfinished War in Sri Lanka, because for me this is quite clear. The government, although they won the war in 2009, the conflict is not over, and in fact the war is being prosecuted through other means. It is out there on the website. People can download it, and what we have been doing is in fact going around different countries. We released the report in time before the Geneva resolution because we wanted to influence the resolution and ensure that states really understood what is actually going on in Sri Lanka. I have to say that Canada has played an incredibly positive role. They arranged for me to brief member states in Geneva. They did the launch in London. They did a launch in New York the other day. And of course, in this week, I have done a number of presentations on the report. And that's really important to put out there what is happening in Sri Lanka.
You know, there is so many questions that I can ask you about the report, but I would encourage people to read it and give your feedback. And, Canada is very generous in supporting causes that are really important, but also many Sri Lankans are part of our community as well. So this report is very important to us, and I'm sure we will find ways to work with you. And I would be remiss if I wouldn't finish my concluding question with you and say, Yasmin, when I met you yesterday, it was like my life changed. I kept looking at you and thinking, why does Yasmin keep doing this? Most people would have stopped at Truth and Reconciliation. Most people would have stopped at Sri Lankan process. Why would you keep going? What makes Yasmin get up in the morning and keep doing this work?
I think the question of survivors. I was struck by the resilience of the people that I interviewed. And it's one of those things. I continue to work on issues that emanate from the work of the Truth Commission in South Africa. In fact, I still deal with cases of disappearances and still deal with the question of reparations. I'm still trying to launch prosecutions in my own country, and I kind of feel that I can't let go until I begin to see some justice for the victims in Sri Lanka. But maybe I'm a junkie, I don't know. But it's what gives me the impetus to get up in the morning. The fact that, in a way, you're putting a brick in the wall. It was really interesting in the New York briefing. I was sitting across the table from General Shavendra Silva, who was in fact the commander of the 58th Battalion, and this is the battalion that was in the war zone, that was really responsible. I mean, the allegations are that he was the person who was dealing with the surrender, and he said to me, these are all lies, and why don't I give him the names, the times, and the locations? And one of the other persons present there said, well, we all know if we give you the names, your government will arrange to have them killed. And it was quite a chilling moment. So he said to me, give me the times, give me the locations. So I said, well, I will give this over to the UN inquiry. And I've read in the newspaper that your government has said it will not cooperate with the inquiry. In my view, it's in your best interest and that of your country. If you're telling the truth, let's clear you. But we can't have you do it. We need an independent international body to do that. So I encourage you actually to participate and in fact to collaborate with the inquiry. And that's where we left it.
And have you been allowed to go to Sri Lanka?
Well, I think I am on the top persona non grata list. Yeah.
Yasmin, this has been an absolute privilege to speak to you, and then for you to agree to, share your thoughts on issues that are so close to your heart with Canadians and hopefully others as well. And we wish you best of luck in all the work you're doing, and we want you to know that it is people like that that we really feel that will change the way impunity is dealt with in the world. If we're going to stop these atrocities, it is a Yasmin who will do it. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you very much.